You're the owner, you're the CFO. It's all on your head. You got to deal with it. And then the only question is, are you happy with that? When we go and look for new CFOs, that's one of the questions we ask. Have they done acquisitions? If you're in the middle of everything, well, one, you have no life. And two, when you're ready to sell, no one wants to buy it because you're the whole business and they're not buying you.
With me today, I have Gershon Morgulis. He is the founder and chief business philosopher at Imperial Advisory CFOs, which is a team of experienced CFOs that bring business owners the clarity they need to make better financial decisions. So we'll talk a lot about finances and money, which some people don't want to talk about, some people kind of overinflate, but hopefully we'll get some true and real answers around that. Gershon, how are you feeling today?
I am doing good. Good to be here with you, Zivko. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Now, let's go directly into it. We're talking about CFOs. Can you tell me, typical thing when someone thinks of a CFO? What are the misconceptions of what is a CFO that he does in a company, and what is truly the job of a CFO in a corporation?
The job of a CFO, and different people might give you different answers, but you asked me. The job of a CFO is to allocate capital. It's finding the best investments for the resources that you have. And so those could be the financial resources, it could be the human resources, it could be the infrastructure, manufacturing, machinery. Every business, in theory, there's an unlimited number of opportunities that you can take advantage of. But where do you put your money? Where do you put your people? What's the smartest and best use? That's where, the marketing people could tell us, if you put money into this, here's what will happen. But is that better or worse than buying a competing company and growing that way? Right? One is marketing budget, one is capital. Now, so which of those is better? They're both ways to grow. That's where the CFO comes in.
In your experience, do you feel, because you work with a lot of companies and with a lot of CFOs, do you feel in the beginning the CFO is set for success, or he has a really tough road ahead of him when he takes on a new position in a new company to allocate and to allow that capital for whatever the company decides to do with it?
What I can tell you is there's this number out there. I've not done the primary research, but they say CFOs last 3 years on average. So I guess the answer to your question is it's an uphill battle. But I think it really depends on what's going on. I mean, there are companies where you go in, they have a problem, they know what their problem is, and they're like, come here, help me with this. And then the truth is we sometimes work for CFOs. When we work for a CFO, they're an educated consumer. If you remember Sims, the suit store, right? Educated consumer is our best customer. The CFOs who hire us are educated consumers. Some CEOs are more educated than others, but when you go in and it's clear there's a problem, they need your help with something, that's probably going to be a little bit easier, maybe less intellectually stimulating, but it will probably be easier because you know how to solve it, then you just go and solve it. And, that could be a long-term thing, a short-term thing, whatever. Sometimes you go into a company and there's just something wrong and nobody really knows what's wrong. It's just wrong. Or they know what's wrong, but they don't know why it's wrong. And, you're digging and there are layers. And so sometimes a business owner is going to lose patience. They're going to say, you know what, I already spent money on this. Well, why haven't you figured it all out? It's like, and sometimes the answer is because you put handcuffs on us when we showed up. And sometimes the answer is because it just takes a long time, or because we've gotten through a few layers, but not through them all. You walk into a company and they have a cash flow problem. Okay, so let's solve cash flow. So what do we need to change? Well, let's look at the accounting and see where we're making money, what's been causing the cash flow problem. Suddenly you realize the accounting's wrong. And so they're like, why aren't you fixing cash flow? It's because I'm missing the data to get the clarity to help you make good decisions. We think that you have too much inventory, but maybe really you have a different problem. Maybe you're like paying too much. Maybe your margins are off. Your books don't tell us if you're receiving all the revenue that you claim you're receiving. Maybe you're not getting the revenue. So and maybe you're getting it, but you're getting it late and you're growing, and that's what's called, there's 15 different things. And like we can slash and burn the inventory, and then it turns out that was never the issue to begin with. So yeah, when you go into a situation like that, I mean, to some degree, you're fighting an uphill battle. But what I told someone yesterday, COO who wanted to bring us into a fractional COO who wanted to bring us into one of the businesses his clients own, I said, there's two things that are really critical, which is one, that the owner recognizes there's a problem and wants to solve it. And the other is that they're willing to hold their team accountable. Because we've gone into businesses where, we identify the problem and the owner agrees, but he's like, well, the bookkeeper doesn't really want to do this or that, so we're gonna just kind of let it slide. And it's like, okay, but then it's going to stay the way it was before, and it's not going to get solved. So, I mean, I think that those two things, the owner holding the people accountable, the owner understanding and caring, obviously they need to care, but then you got to care enough to want the problem solved and be willing to get their people on board or to give us control.
Now, this one is an interesting one because you're saying the owner wants to solve it and knows there's a problem and wants to hold the team accountable. When we talk about the team being held accountable, in your experience, is it because they have a fantastic relationship and it's just hard to believe that that accountant messed up for so many years and now you're showing him the honest truth and they just can't hold that person accountable? Or is it it's new information and they need more time to see more of your work to be like, what they're doing is true, I'm convinced, now I can hold myself accountable? Basically, the point I want to make is, why would someone not want to hold someone accountable when you clearly are laying out, here is the findings?
I mean, it's a tough question. I guess it's uncomfortable. I mean, I know for myself, it's uncomfortable sometimes to hold people accountable. They do have a long-standing relationship, but it's not that they don't believe that something's off. I mean, one CEO we worked with told me something to the effect of, I know it needs to happen, but the bookkeeper needs to be willing to work with you. And if he claims he can do it himself, I'm going to let him try. And if he doesn't do a good job, which he probably won't, he'll come back to you. But I'm not going to force you down his throat. And it was like changing the way they did something, whatever it was. I think that was actually about building a budget. He's like, he doesn't know how to build a budget. I know he doesn't know how to build a budget. But we got to get to the point where he knows he doesn't know how to build a budget. Because basically the owner didn't want to rock the boat. And he felt like this bookkeeper was valuable enough in other places where, by the way, our team agreed. This was a good, but he wasn't the guy to do budgeting. And, whereas in other cases, I think back to a client we had, and their bookkeeper was the problem. Legit. The bookkeeper was the problem. Well, he wasn't the only problem. The owners were the problem too, but the bookkeeper was also the problem. And we got the owners on board. We figured out what needed to happen, but they didn't want to get rid of the bookkeeper. Eventually they did. Eventually, to their credit. But they realized that the bookkeeper was a problem. But again, I think it's really comes down to not wanting to rock the boat. Because even there, they're like, well, we're in distress, we're this, we're that. Like, what do we need this added headache to? But the problem was that this added headache of fixing their team would have gotten them good, usable information so they don't end up back in the same hole they were in before we got there. So
I see. So sometimes it's not rocking the boat. Sometimes it's about, is this the right way to do it, and procedure wise, because maybe too many changes in the person that you work with may not want to do all those things. And let's say they talk with you, and let's say with the first option where the owner wants to solve it, and we haven't gotten to the latter part. The owner wants to solve it. What point should an owner consider bringing in a CFO?
What I tell people is, you don't get to be a $10 million business. We're talking about what's big and what's small, but let's just say a $10 million business with 20, 30, 40 people. You can't be that size business without basic financial infrastructure. It's very difficult. We did once walk into a $10 million business with tons of employees that had no bookkeeping. Everything was done out of a shoebox. But that's very rare. I think only once in the last 5 years. It was literally, we weren't there, but I think that's what they told us. There was no accounting system, nothing going on. But okay, that like I said, that's rare. You don't get to be a $10 million business without having some basic infrastructure, right? Someone's got to collect the money, It's either a credit card processing machine or a collections team, an AR, someone like, right? You got to be doing payroll. You got to pay your other bills. Somehow, some way, you're probably paying taxes, whether it's sales tax or income tax or like something somewhere. Like you're going to have the basic infrastructure. You're not going to be a certain point. You're going to have that stuff. So the question is, those are the basics. That's table stakes. You need to have it. It might not be good, might not be done right, but it's going to be happening. That's like you can't really run a business without that. So the question then, and that could be one or more people doing it. Those are multiple functions, but they got to be happening somehow. So the question is, by the time you get to be a $10 million business, usually you also need to have a CFO. And that's whether you're 10 million, let's call it 20 to 30 people. You got to have a CFO because things start getting complicated. Things start breaking. Something's not working. And so what I tell people is, you're the owner, you're the CFO. It's all in your head. You got to deal with it. It's you. And then the only question is, are you happy with that? And so if you, the owner, are happy continuing in your current role, which by the time you reach that point, 5 to 10 million, 20, 30 people, more often than not, I would say the owner is the CFO. And then, like I said, are you happy with that? If it's working for you, great. If it's not working for you because either you're not doing a good job, you're not enjoying yourself, or you realize that there's so many other things that you probably should be doing that you're not doing, that this is just really for you a distraction, that's when it's time to bring in someone else. And that could be a full-time person, it could be a part-time person, be a full-time person until you find the right long-term, full-time interim maybe until you find the right long-term solution.
Right. So it's a clear, I would say it's a clear description of the process. You're saying you're basically the CFO, and then once you don't want to do that function anymore, at that point, you bring in someone that is an expert that, as you mentioned at the beginning, they do a lot of allocation of funds of where the company wants to grow and all those things. Now, when we are looking at that kind of new position that this owner is going to allow the CFO to do, what are the typical responsibilities they should allow and assign to the CFO, and what are the ones they really shouldn't bother the CFO with?
So, I mean, to a certain degree, the CFO is probably the one who should be defining this more than the owner. But we'll talk about the roles. I mean, they have what we call accounting operations and really record keeping. So like stuff happens, right? People buy stuff, people sell stuff. There's the day-to-day transactional work. So those transactions have to happen. They have to be recorded. Someone has to turn those random facts into kind of a coherent, get it written down on paper. And that's kind of the accounting function, is the accounting operations, and then the record keeping, which is a bookkeeper, maybe a controller, might be responsible for getting timely, accurate financial information. If those things aren't working, something's broken in that process, the CFO might get involved. But really where the CFO adds tremendous value is when you get past that. And that's where we start looking forward. We start trying to understand both the past and how the past then translates into what's really going to be happening in the future, which is most important, and then making decisions around that. And so if we realize that based on what happened last year and based on the pricing changes we make this year, or let's say before pricing changes, we realize what happened last year, we're going to lose money this year because our overhead went up and our margin stayed the same. Okay. So then we got to raise prices. Well, if we raise prices, what's that going to do? Well, maybe we'll sell a few less because some people won't buy, but on average, we'll make more money. It will cover our expenses, and it's beautiful, right? So who's making those decisions? At what point? Like, or maybe we find a way to get cheaper ingredients, keep the price the same, make the ingredients less. Is that going to ruin our brand? Is that a smart move? Is that not a smart move? These are all questions that obviously, if it's a branding issue, we're going to be talking to marketing people also, but there's financial impact to all these decisions. So the CFO really belongs in these conversations. And I'll call a friend of mine who was a CEO for a number of years, and he told me, my job is to run. My CFO's job is to tell me in which direction. And again, in which direction is more than just math. It's about nuanced understanding. There's a lot of strategy around this stuff. And yeah, I mean, that's so the CEO is the guy who comes up with all the great ideas, right? Why don't we just raise prices? Well, okay, because if we raise prices, we're going to X, Y, and Z. So why don't we just like use cheaper ingredients? Because cheaper ingredients are going to lead to that problem. Well, why don't we borrow the money and solve it that way? Because then you're going to pay interest. And like, so the CEO probably has 20 different solutions, but which is the right one? And which one should he or she go execute on? That's really the CFO's job, is to help figure those, be a thought partner and figure those things out. I mean, we also help clients with, again, managing the accounting. If there are problems there, we help solve things. We help managing external relationships. We had a client that they needed to grow. And to grow, they needed people. And to get people, they needed better benefits. So we recommended that they explore PEO. That was a good move for them, we felt at the time. So now they had that PEO, but we, as senior executives, the guy, CFO we had there, had been dealing with health insurance and all sorts of other things over his career. He helped with implementing the PEO, right? And then when there was some issue with the PEO later, we were the ones they called because we have the experience and we, our job is to be there and do the things, because otherwise that's all on the CEO's plate, and that's not, not helpful.
It's very clear in my mind, and I think a lot of people will understand it better with the phrase that you said, like the it's my job to run and the CFO tells me in which direction, where the CEO and the COO are coming up with solutions and the CFO says, this is a good idea based on financials and it will make sense, or this is a bad idea because it will not get the goal you want. And that is the person that tells you the allocation, the money, what will be involved, where the CEO or COO comes up with a plan, a strategy, and maybe brings at a early stage, and then the CFO says this will completely make sense. Now, when we're doing these, when they were doing these conversations, and if it's with you and with your team or with your clients, do you just look at numbers, basically like number crunching, and to see if the math is making sense, if it's a business kind of decision, or do you use something else to make more of the forecasting? Like you said, we're looking at the past, but we're forecasting for the future to make sure that when you're giving the advice on the idea is the most sane one that you can give from a CFO perspective. Basically, the point I want to make is, are you looking at numbers when you're saying if it's a good or bad idea, or you're looking at a couple of X factors that are just not number crunching for a CFO to advise the CEO?
There's plenty that goes beyond numbers. I mean, you could build a financial model to say anything, right? Grow 10% a year and XYZ will happen. But part of the question is, can you get the people to service the work if you're growing 10%? Now, 10%, maybe less of an issue. How about growing 100% a year, right? 100% a year. Look, we should invest in marketing. Well, do we have the people? Are they part of that conversation? So, and maybe we have the people, but we're going to run out of cash because we got to pay people earlier rather than later, right? You can look at a P&L and everything looks beautiful, but sometimes it's about understanding how things work. And so like, that's beyond the simple, hey, if we have more sales, we'll make more money. It's sure, if we invest in marketing, we'll have more sales, but then we got to lay out payroll earlier. So we need a plan for that. Is that going to be equity or debt, right? We got to get capital. Should it be equity capital or debt capital? That's more than just like a numbers conversation, because yeah, sure, I could tell you a rule of thumb. Equity capital, getting an equity investor is going to be more expensive, but getting a debt investor is going to put pressure on you to pay them back. You're going to have to pay them back, and have to pay them back sooner on a specific schedule. Is that going to hamper your ability to do interest run your business? Interest accrues. We've seen clients, we walk into and debt is an issue, and they borrowed money more than they can afford because they did it without a plan. So sure, yeah, they borrowed money and they invested in marketing, but then something didn't work and they took major risks that they didn't realize they were taking. So I mean, you could argue that ultimately things boil down to numbers, because back to our toxic person example, right? If you have a toxic person and they destroy your business, your number that represents your profit will be much lower. But I would say that probably would, recognizing that this person is a problem and that we should invest in helping solve that problem, whether that's investing in a new employee to replace them or investing in some way to train them, help make them better, etc. I would consider those to be things beyond numbers, even though ultimately they do impact the numbers.
Got it, got it. It's like what we were mentioning off camera. Like if you have someone that, you know what, he doesn't go along well with the team, but he has a massive impact, and maybe he's the sales rep or a CMO or a CSO, you're looking beyond the numbers to say, look, there are some programs we can do, maybe some coaching we can do, or maybe set maybe 2 or 3 people that we'll hire to see which one can replace that person. That is more than just numbers, because yeah, you're looking at the bottom line, but the decisions and the advices are not number driven, just like basic bottom lines. It's a broader conversation. Let's say you have you're working with your client, the CFO is there, they're advising, they're allocating, they're looking towards the future, and you're planning the financials, where the company wants to, or where the company wants to go. What is the difference in what a CFO has to do for a startup versus a mid-size or a small business when it comes to the advices they're giving them? And this will be probably like more of a broad stroke, of course, because you can say like if there is a specific problem, they solve it. But let's say they're like, we want to grow. Cash flow, I think that's a typical first thing that people will say. We have a cash flow problem, we want to grow. What is the advice the CFO should give to a startup versus a kind of medium-sized business?
So, I mean, startups are very different than established businesses. And there's a rule of thumb, I think you mentioned offline, you mentioned Alex Hormozy. One of the things I saw from him is, and I've probably seen it elsewhere too, that if you want to grow, just do more of the stuff that works. So startups really don't have that. Startups are at a phase where they just often don't know what works. And you got to invest a lot of money in developing things and then experimenting, whether it's with marketing or experimenting and developing of whatever it is that you're developing. So startups end up in a position where they often need outside capital. And if they're in a space where investors believe that they can really create a lot of value quickly, that outside capital may be, there may be a lot of outside capital that's willing to become inside capital. Investors may be willing to give them money. So CFO at a startup is probably going to be heavily involved in that process, whether it's in justifying the valuation or helping hone the story so that investors are comfortable with it, or just being, an experienced, steady hand at the wheel, right? You're an investor, you're about to pony up $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million or $5 million. You want to know that this is not just some engineer who graduated from school yesterday. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like, you have an experienced person there, like this is the great engineer and this is the great money guy or girl. So the CFO does definitely get involved in many aspects of the fundraising process, even a part-time or fractional CFO. But I don't want to minimize the fact that there's also regular normal operational type things that a CFO does. I mean, we've been, most of our clients are more established, but we've been CFO of startups, and just one thing that comes to mind, one of our CFOs told me he was working with a startup on helping them define the channel. They're not necessarily selling yet, but they don't have a product to sell. But these are the normal types of things. It's like the normal things that you would do at a larger business, right? If we want to sell more stuff, well, who are we selling it to? And going through that whole conversation, I mean, you could call that building the model and building the pitch, but it's also building a business. And so obviously that stuff's going on at larger businesses, but that happens at startups too. With larger businesses, the CFO is usually, like we said before, they're taking that role of financial analysis and financial management and stewardship away from the CEO. So the startup has no CFO, and then the CFO comes in. The more established companies have a CFO, and their other name is owner or CEO.
Got it. So it's a different beast. They have to go after depending on the size they are, and eventually they do have those regular operational stuff like you were mentioning. But even defining marketing channel is crucial in the beginning to do those things. Now, one of the comments that I heard, and I think I mentioned this off camera as well, a client of mine said that a CFO, if they've never done an M&A, if they've never sold a company, it's not a real CFO. You just gave your accountant a fancy title. How do you feel about that comment?
Wow. Shot across the bow. All right. How do we feel about that? So I'll tell you that when we go and look for new CFOs, that's one of the questions we ask. Have they done acquisitions? So, it's definitely valuable, and it's one of the scenarios where clients realize that they need help. So there's a lot of truth to that statement. I mean, strictly speaking, I would disagree, right? You could be a really good CFO, and there's many different things where you can say that about it. If you've never done an ERP implementation, you're not a CFO. If you've never done, if you've never fired a controller, you're not a CFO. I mean, we could come up with lots of things that a CFO with experience has probably done, but I mean, not every company grows via acquisition. Some companies grow by growing, and does that mean you're not a CFO? I don't know. Does it mean that you're not a good match for a fractional CFO firm that says our guys know everything and have seen it all? Yeah, that might be true.
Got it. So for you, it's there's some merit to it, but it's not like a rule to live and die by. It's something that is very beneficial for a CFO. You do that in your interview process, but it's not like they have to. Otherwise, it's disregarded as a good CFO.
Right. It might not be a match for us. It might not be a match for a particular company, but I don't know. I mean, how does any CFO do their first M&A deal?
They have to sell the company they work at.
No, but who's going to sell it for them? I guess they have to hire a different CFO, but then does it count if they hire a different CFO to sell it? Then do they become a CFO if they're there for the ride, or do they have to actually run it? I mean, honestly, I'll tell you, this is a big thing, not just with CFOs, maybe more with CFOs, but with people who talk about like the difference between participating in something and doing it and running it. We had someone recently we were speaking to, and there was something that they're like, yeah, I did that 30 or 40 times. It was in the finance realm. It was an M&A deal, an ERP implementation, an audit, whatever. They're like, yeah. And then like, as we're going through it, it's clear that they haven't done it many times. And so then the question is like, are they totally lying, or were they just like there for the ride 30 or 40 times? Like, our assumption is that they were there for the ride 30 or 40 times, but that's how, and that's how you learn. That's not bad. But if you sell yourself as having done it, then it's kind of complicated. I had a call with a guy yesterday, and he said, can I come be a CFO on your team? I said, no, you've only been working for 15 years and you've never been a CFO or anything in accounting and finance. And he said, but what about grit? I'm like, grit is fine, but you also need experience. Can he be a CFO? I would, he could be. I told him, go see if you can sell yourself as a CFO. Go to your current boss, see if he'll let you be the CFO.
Okay.
But there's lots of different skills, lots of different really important skills with the CFO. M&A is definitely one of them, but that's not what every company needs. And what you gain by really, this is a good soundbite. What you gain by working with the firm is that we bring different skills together, right? You could say another example. A CFO who's never done an IPO is not a real CFO. Is that true? A CFO who's never been an auditor is not a real CFO. Is that true? I mean, some people would probably say any of these things. But what you get with working with a firm is we have people who've done M&A. We have people who have been taking companies public. We have people who have done multiple ERP implementations, and they've run them, not just been there for the ride. We have other people who've been there for the ride, but not run them, but those people have other skills, right? The guy with the ERP maybe doesn't have M&A, and the guy with the M&A maybe doesn't have ERP. But when you come together as a firm, we kind of bring all that to our clients and our network.
It's true. You need those things because you have different specific requirements. So you're trying to explain to everyone that look, a CFO is not just like a pigeonhole. They solve a problem, and your problem might be different from the quote unquote best CFO because they might be very good at IPOs or exits, and then you have someone that you need to raise funds, which is this guy can't do the job for you. Another one that we will do is great CFOs don't have to be accountants.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. That I agree with. So, I mean, again, you've got different types of CFOs, different types of skills. Something else that I'll just mention as part of this whole, what do you need to be a CFO? There's internal CFOs and there's external CFOs. You have some CFOs who are experts in raising capital. That doesn't necessarily make them good at doing acquisitions, and to be good at raising capital, you might not be an accountant. You have other CFOs who are more internal people. They got everything internally done, from process to managing the people to forecasting or whatever, but they're not really good at raising capital. So, and you maybe have some people who can do everything, but usually you don't have people who are the best at everything. They're usually, really good at some things, hopefully medium good at other things. But back to your thing, do you need to be an accountant to be a CFO? No. I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal probably 2-3 years ago saying that like the S&P 500, there's only like 50% of their CFOs have accounting as their college major, or only 50% maybe had a CPA. There is this notion that you need to be a CPA to be a CFO, or an accountant at least. And you do need to understand accounting if you want to do a good job. But depending on your role, if your role is primarily fundraising and talking to investors, do you really need to be an accountant? Maybe not. If your role is primarily producing, accurate financial statements, you might not be a CFO, but you should probably be an accountant. And then there's everything in between. So I will tell you, we have on our team, probably about half of our team has accounting degrees, and the other half came up through finance or some other, closely economics, finance, something like that, closely related discipline. And like I said, that's what's going on at the Fortune, the S&P 500 companies as well.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned, because we mentioned this a couple of times, exits and M&As and stuff like that. Can you tell us, how does someone set their business properly for a CFO to come in to be like, okay, look, we got a plan, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 7 years, whatever it might be, we want to exit. What do they need to do to set up properly, or what does the CFO need to do in that situation to set that business to be sold?
So there's a lot of different things. I'll go through a few. The first is kind of perspective. Build the house that you want to sell. You'll probably enjoy living in it as well, right? That's with a homeowner. Like, people do all this fix up right before they move, but like, imagine if you did that fix up 3 years before, you'd probably have a much more pleasant experience. Like, all those broken leaky faucets, if you fix them, then they won't be leaking for the next 3 years. They also won't be leaking when you want to sell in 3 years. So it's the same kind of thing with a business, right? Build the business that you can sell, and you'll probably have a much better time running it. So what does that mean? That means, from a business owner's perspective, you don't want to be in the middle of everything. If you're in the middle of everything, well, one, you have no life, and two, when you're ready to sell, no one wants to buy it because you're the whole business and they're not buying you, right? So, owner, don't be in the middle of everything, right? Have policies and procedures. Have the business needs to be able to run. People need to have consistency in what they produce. So for whatever you're not involved in, standardizing things. And this is a little complicated for creative people to standardize things. They sometimes believe that they can't be standardized. We talk to them too, and there are solutions. But, standardize things. Make sure that your accounting is clean. legible. People can understand it. They read it. There's not some crazy story that you got to sell, like why you made no money, but really your business made $1 million or 5 million or 10 million last year. Just whatever your just is, the bank's probably not going to buy it and the investor's not going to buy it. And so, like, you go to an investor and you say, well, I made $1 million last year, but really I made $5 million. And just, well, a few $1 million was because I stuck it in my retirement plan. And the other few $1 million was because I did some tax scam and, and really the revenue's more, but I just took cash and it's not on the books. And like, by the time you're done with this whole story, they're like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. But this is something that buyers get really nervous about. Now, are you going to pay more taxes if you report your income? Yeah, maybe. Maybe you will, but that way you also won't be stealing. And also, like, when you want to go get a loan from a bank, you want to get an outside investor, like, you need the story to be there. Once your tax return doesn't match your books, which doesn't match the story you claim is going on in your business, you just lose a lot of confidence. So it's about just running it the way it should be run. Do things right. Don't have like one customer. You'd be surprised how many businesses, like, their whole business hinges on one or two customers. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three. You know what? You could lose 3 customers. Anyone can lose 3 customers. And if your top 3 customers make up half of your revenue and you lose that, that's a problem. It's a huge problem. And if you're a buyer, what are you going to say? You're going to say, what if we lose those top 3 customers? Then the whole business is down the drain. I'm not paying for that. Why should I pay for that? Is that helpful?
That was very helpful. Especially, I think there is this idea that, you know what, it's easier if you just, work with like bigger numbers and have that stability. Like, hey, it takes the same amount to sell to this one than to sell someone a lot more. But when you're saying, like, if you have like 2 to 3 big clients and that's like 50% of your revenue, it is a problem to sell that business, because if you have a big net of a lot of customers, doesn't mean thousands and millions. I'm just saying a lot more than 2, 3 to make a 50% of revenue. When you want to sell it, it's a lot easier for a buyer to be like, yes, I can take this to the next level. There's a lot more blue sky that we can kind of work with in this sphere. Now, we have a couple of minutes left, a couple of questions left here as well. What are some of the stuff that you want to tell people, be very cautious of what you hear and what you're watching, whether that be from YouTube, whether that be from quote unquote expert or whatever it might be? What is some common advice that you hear that you're like, that's not the right one? I know it makes logical sense potentially, but that's not the right advice.
I mean, one thing that you touched on earlier was the toxic employee thing. And so it's about taking it in the bigger context, right? Toxic employees are dangerous. But if you're a head salesperson who owns 3/4 of your accounts is toxic and you have a business employing 40 people, do you really want to can that person and potentially destroy your entire business? Or do you find a way to kind of manage some of that risk? So, the popular answer might be toxic, get rid of them. The other answer is dig a little deeper, see what you can do maybe to mitigate the toxicity, or bury it, or silo it, or maybe work on improving it, right? Try to see how you can help that person get better. And not saying that there's never a place for terminating people, for laying people off, or firing people, whatever. But this is something which you see people talk about that I kind of found that interesting other perspective. Other advice, I mean, I'll just tell you one thing to be careful about is debt. Like, super, super careful. People go into debt, they don't realize what they're doing, they don't realize what the impact is going to be, and before they turn around, they are in so much trouble. I mean, and we see this, and it's so sad. But you have someone who they're running essentially like a legitimate good business, but because of some mistake they made last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, all their profit is going to pay down debt. Maybe more than their profit is going to pay down debt, right? So they could be running at a loss only because they're still paying down the debt. And sometimes the debt is also a little bit sketchy, right? There's certain types of loans which people don't even realize what they're getting into. So, I mean, People assume, oh yeah, you can borrow your way out of it. Not necessarily the case. And some people assume that CFO is going to solve their revenue problems. I'm still not sure why, but there are people who assume that. And I mean, a CFO definitely could impact revenue, right? Because they might be able to help with introducing new types of revenue if they have the experience. They've seen, like, let's say you don't have service agreements. Your CFO might say, hey, why don't we implement a service agreement? Let's figure out how to price that. Let's figure out how to do that. You could get ideas from your CFO. They might also help you cut out not profitable lines of business, which doesn't necessarily grow sales, but helps you figure out, like we talked before about allocating capital, where should you allocate your marketing budget? Just straight up marketing, or you say, well, we're going to market this, we're not going to market that because we make more money on this and less money on that. Understand that, or make more money on that, but it makes cash flow worse. And that's going to cause us to need to take out debt, which is going to be dangerous. So maybe we'll do the thing where you make less, but avoid the debt so we stay safe. So CFOs definitely can be very much involved with sales, but there are those people who will be like, if you're not generating revenue, you're not worth it. And that's definitely a misconception.
Okay, I'm happy that you gave us that clarity because especially that last one, I think there's a lot of that the CFO comes in until all of a sudden money flows through the doors. He can't hold it. But it really is the reality is there's a problem. They come in, they fix a problem, whether that be cash flow, whether that be money being spent too much, whether that be there was a mistake that, like you said, the owner made, and now you're paying so much in debt that's where you're using profit. So they can work around finding debt consolidation, maybe reconstructing that debt or something in that facility, but not really kind of, I'll find you money out of nowhere all of a sudden.
Right. And yeah, I mean, that's something many of our clients are profitable and still need help, but sometimes we go into clients where they're in distress and definitely looking to I mean, the first thing is you got to stop the bleeding, the pre-debt bleeding, because that tells us if you have a real business or not. If you're making money and it happens to all be going to pay debt, then you have a much better case. You can go and have a real conversation with someone and say, listen, are you going to let the debt kill me? That's not going to work out well for you. Or let's figure out what to do with the debt so that I can make a living. I can, not me, whatever, that the company can make a profit, and then you'll get paid. Maybe you'll get paid back a little slower. But if you let your debt put us out of business, that's not really a good solution for you either. So, another misconception. Another misconception is some people like buying insurance. I'm trying to remember who. I saw somewhere recently, I was speaking with someone, and they were like talking about, I can get insurance for this or that. And they're like, but they were talking about storm insurance. But storm insurance only comes around there's a storm that only comes every 20 or 30 years. And the price of insurance was going to be like a fifth of the damage that they would have. Right. So let's say it's $100,000 of damage. Insurance is going to cost them $20,000 a year. But the storm only comes around once every 30 years. You'd rather just get hit with that $100,000 damage than pay for the insurance, because you're going to end up paying much more over time. So understanding that insurance is a tool that can be used strategically, and getting the right insurance could maybe enable you not to need to sit on as much capital. But on the flip side, knowing when, right, because let's say in theory you have to sit on this huge reserve for when something goes wrong. Well, maybe you buy insurance on that thing. So if that's something which is really unlikely to happen, but you got to keep the money just in case, you say, you know what, I'll get the insurance and I'll free up the money. But on the flip side, there are many cases where self-insuring might actually be better than buying the insurance. It really depends how insurance is priced.
Got it. It's about it's not just getting insurance. It's the right insurance. Sometimes it doesn't make sense if you have a CFO that will do the calculation to be like, hey, look, if we get hit by it, better just pay it than paying this for 5, 10, 20 years because if you do the math, this one is just self-insured is kind of a lot easier. Now, Gershon, you gave us a lot of information here. If someone listens to this and is like, this is fantastic, they want to talk with you, how did they get a hold of you? How did they do that?
All right. So I'll say my phone number and my email address and the website. You can type those in if possible when you broadcast this, but Gershon, Gershon at imperialgrp.com, which I'm assuming you'll show people. Imperial www.imperialgrp.com and 516-256-9478. That's our number here at Imperial Advisory CFOs.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Zivko.
Thank you so much for the time, man. This was fantastic. I learned a lot, and I hope that people listen to this and they take action and they treat their CFOs with a different light now. They understand kind of what they really can do and the actual application they can have in their business. So appreciate the time, and I wish you all the best.